welcome to AA Connect, the podcast of the Automobile Association, where we talk about all issues related to mobility and mobility for motorists, for people on motorbikes, on bicycles, and pedestrians. And naturally, mobility includes everybody in our country, as well as people with disabilities. And I'm very honored today to be joined by Mr. Raven Benny, the Chief Operating Officer of the QuadPara Association of South Africa. Raven, good morning to you, and thank you for your patience. And just to clarify, you're based down in KwaZulu-Natal, right?
Yeah, good morning, Leighton, and good morning to everyone who's joining us on this podcast.
And Raven, I think the natural first question, obviously, because I think everybody asks you this, is what exactly is the QuadPara Association?
Yes, that is a good question, and it's not always very easy to explain very quickly. But let me start by saying the QuadPara Association is a non-profit organization consisting of quadriplegics and paraplegics. It sets out to improve the lives of all South Africans, so all South African quadriplegics and paraplegics. But I should also fit in there also a description or quick definition of quadriplegic. Quadriplegic is someone that has paralysis in all four of their limbs. And a paraplegic is someone that only has in two limbs, usually the lower limbs that is affected. So most quadriplegics and paraplegics are wheelchair users. So we are mobility impaired persons. So we are the organization of quadriplegics and paraplegics that sets out to improve the lives of quadriplegics and paraplegics in South Africa.
And Draven, how many quadriplegics and paraplegics do we have in South Africa? Do we have a number? Do we have a figure?
We do not have an accurate number because, unfortunately, it's also a number that increases as we speak because there's many causes for quadriplegia and paraplegia. We know road accidents and gang violence and certain accidents, rugby injuries. There's lots of causes for it. And it's also very difficult to get accurate figures from the Department of Health or from any other source where we get it. But we roughly, and we know that we have a membership that is about 6,000 members.
Right.
So these are members, but not every quadriplegic and paraplegic is a member of the organization. So,
okay.
Yes. So roughly that it can be a big number. But what we do is we have a database that we keep track of all the quadriplegics and paraplegics that we know of. We also reach out to the rehabilitation units where we can capture and gather the information that have it. And we have roughly an estimation that currently there's about just under 16,000 quadriplegics and paraplegics that we are aware of.
Okay, and I mean we're talking at a time in South Africa now where we obviously all watching what's happening in Tokyo with the Paralympics, and we've won a couple of gold medals and a silver medal, and I see you smiling, and I think everybody's really excited about that. I think that just brings this issue of quadriplegia and paraplegia back to people's minds again. People kind of realize that there are people with disabilities that live amongst us, and there's nothing wrong with it. They're completely functioning, happy people, and they're part of our society. I mean, and they need to be as celebrated as everybody else.
That is a reality, and it is. And I'm glad that you see me nodding and smiling there because we love this time of the year or whenever the time comes around. Everyone is celebrating the achievements of the Paralympic athletes.
Yes.
And it's not Paralympic athletes. They compete in parasports. And just quickly on that, we know why it's called the Paralympics because it's parallel to the Olympics.
Oh, okay.
But those are not para athletes. They are athletes.
Right.
They're competing in there, and they're making us all extremely proud. And also, just to get there for them this year with the pandemic, it has been more difficult. So we are celebrating the achievements of them there, but the participation of them is more important for us also because, as you say, we are part of society. We are also a diversity because people with disabilities is also a diversity. So we're part of a society. We also see now that there's a strong campaign joined with the Paralympics to explain exactly how big the demographic of people with disabilities worldwide
is.
actually.
Well, thank you for that. I mean,
Yes.
you've actually educated me. I didn't know that it was parallel to the Olympics, which is great. I mean, obviously, I think everybody looks at Paralympics and associates it with a paraplegic, but that I think is the incorrect one, obviously also based on your description a bit earlier. So thank you for that. Um, just, tell us a little bit about your own story and how you became involved in the QuadPara Association, Raven.
Leighton, and to speak to you about this is very significant because I mentioned that there are numerous causes of quadriplegia and paraplegia. And in my case, I broke my neck in a car accident in the year 2000, which we all know is 21 years ago. And I was oblivious to people with disabilities or the life as a person with a disability because I was young and fit and strong. I was 29 years old at the time,
Sure.
young and fit and strong. And unfortunately for me, I was on the back seat of the vehicle, of which my father was driving. And I was sleeping because I had did the first shift of driving. I was sleeping and I don't know what happened. I don't recall what happened, but I know that I woke up to this. So we were involved in the car accident as a family together. Luckily, we all survived, but I unfortunately broke my neck in that accident. And that immediately rendered me not only a statistic on our roads, but also as a person with a disability because I broke my neck and the C4 and 5 lesion vertebra, and that caused me to be paralyzed in all four of my limbs, and I'm a quadriplegic. It happened suddenly and immediately. As I woke up to it, my whole life was turned upside down. It took me some time to get used to what has happened. I went through the usual motions of how to deal with the trauma. The whole family was affected. Ended up in hospital, and there, while I was in hospital, I was actually introduced to the Quadriplegic Association. Because I'm a quadriplegic, that is some of the support of the information that I was given, and by getting to know what the Quadriplegic Association could offer at the time, the information and the services that actually attracted me to the organization, and I became a member. I did not only become a member of the organization, I had to go back to society. But this time it was different because now I went back as a person with mobility impairments. I could not run or walk or stand anymore. I had to use a wheelchair. And that for me was the start of a difficult journey. But with the support that I had from the organization, I could manage it. I could navigate and negotiate it. And here I find myself today after many years of trial and error and of information that I received and also my involvement and seeing that this is an organization where you don't only get services from, you can give also. So that is a little bit in a nutshell my story of how I became involved in the QuadPara Association. I served in the board for quite a few years, and then until 2 years ago, when the opportunity arose and I applied for the position, and I was appointed as the chief operation officer by replacing the previous CEO, who retired due to health reasons.
So I think one of the things about you, Raven, that I find quite inspirational is that you actually carried on with your life in terms of the sport and in terms of your activities. So you didn't just say, okay, well, I'm a quadriplegic now, I'm in a wheelchair, that's my life. You've actually taken it a little bit further. Tell us a little bit about this involvement you have with wheelchair rugby.
Leighton, thank you very much for touching on that. And I joke about it now ever so often and said that was my claim to fame. But in my previous life, I played sport.
Yeah.
And not professional, but I worked at a big hospital in Cape Town. I was part of the soccer team there. I played volleyball in the off season. So when my whole life was changed, I had to participate in some of the activities just for that sake of normality.
Yeah.
So for me, I qualified now to participate in the sport of wheelchair rugby because I fit the criteria. I have paralysis in all four of my limbs. And when I saw first what the sport is all about, I was hooked immediately.
And you've represented South Africa.
I did. I also have to add that I was very, very happy yesterday. I celebrated with the gold medal winners yesterday, because that was yesterday that the final of the wheelchair rugby was. And I could celebrate with him because that is also the team that introduced me to the sport. But that's a long story, because I met with the Paralympic team of Great Britain first before I became involved in South African team.
Okay.
And they introduced me to the sport, invited me to a training camp at way back in 2002. And that is where I became involved in joined the club, and I could see the benefits that it had in the sport. And I could also, as you mentioned now, could end up representing my country on 2 occasions in the sport. But for me, the sport is very important, not only as a leisure activity, but also as a way of keeping fit. Because if you are fit, you are healthy, and chances of getting ill or just a minor illnesses like the flu, or if you're fit, you are less prone to contracting illnesses.
And I mean, having played rugby myself, I know whatever form of rugby you play, you always make friends, and you got lots of mates in that sport.
The social activities, or the social part of the game, is extraordinary.
Yeah.
Because you make lifelong friends.
Exactly.
And then also it's also very good to be able to compete. Also, it's very good, and also a way of to get rid of some of the frustrations.
Yes.
All week I have to behave myself and use my day chair that I get around. But on a weekend, then you get a chance to get strapped into a rugby chair.
Yes.
And then you can, yes.
So let's talk about the rugby chair and about the chairs and all of this thing. As someone who's had a quadriplegic in my life, my father was in a wheelchair. He lost both his legs. I know it's not cheap. It's expensive being a quadriplegic or a paraplegic, right? I mean, and I say that with the greatest respect.
It is. And as you start off by the chair, to make an example, for me, the biggest barrier to participating in a sport was to get there, because now it's easy. If you play soccer, you can grab your boots and put it in a bag and put it on your back and jog down to the field.
Right.
With the rugby chairs, it's a little bit difficult.
Right.
Because now, you first and foremost, you would have to have a vehicle that will be able to carry that chair with you, and your own wheelchair. So to get around, for me, that is the biggest barrier today. Participating in sport is the transport to get there. Besides the equipment is expensive.
But it's the mobility of it. It's the mobility and not being as mobile as you would if you weren't in a wheelchair.
Exactly. Yes, and as you mentioned, you're so right in mentioning that the cost of the equipment is also a barrier.
Yeah.
But in my case, we were supported as a club, so I could get there. And in Cape Town, we have the dial-a-ride service where I started out. It's only 2 years that I'm in Durban now. We have the dial-a-ride service, and they accommodated you with your sports chair at times, and then also you rely on friends to now and then to assist you. But even if you have your own vehicle, I'm fortunate to have been able to go back to work. And by being able to work, I was able to afford a vehicle.
Right.
Even if I have my own vehicle, I will still struggle to put the wheelchair in the boot or to get around. So you need assistance.
Yes.
You need volunteer. So there's some barriers. That is why I appreciate the fact that we celebrate the achievements of the athletes there, because we know what goes into getting them fit and getting them ready, getting them moving around.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just a question of going down to the gym and having a workout. I mean, there's a whole routine that, and I think, and again, with the greatest respect, I think anybody who's had a baby will understand. It's the wheelchair, it's the bags, it's everything that goes into it. So it's not just a question of, I want to go to the gym at 8, I'll leave it at 6:45 at 7:30. I want to go to the gym at 8, therefore I have to start preparing at 6:30 type of deal, right? Yeah. So there's a whole thing that goes into it. And I guess, Raven, this touches very much on the issue that I actually want to talk to you about, and that is the mobility of people with disabilities. And it's extremely important to recognize that people with disabilities need to be as mobile as anybody else. But talk me through, for instance, if I were to get a car and to do a conversion of that car to make it quadriplegic friendly, what is the process? And I mean, that in itself is quite expensive.
It is because it's not a one size fits all approach. That is what also makes it so expensive. And it's not a service or product that is being offered off the shelf. It also makes it expensive because you would have to, it's very specialized. And at the moment, there's quite a few agents around the country that does the adaptation for vehicles. Because that is first where it starts. You, as a person with a disability, you would have to have the agility and the ability to be able to handle or to first of all, to transfer into a vehicle independently, or whether it is with a device or a hoist or a lift. So you would first have to be, so you first would need to have an assessment by an occupational therapist to determine whether you can operate that vehicle be it safely and without being a danger to yourself or to the public. So you first
hang
need
on.
that assessment.
So you have to do that. So you can't just go to an agent and say, I want to have this done. You need to have an assessment done by the occupational therapist who then almost gives you the green light to have that done. So you need to be able to do it.
You can take a chance to do that, but the agent or the person that does the adaptations has got the experience of the adaptation and the vehicle, no experience of the extent of your ability and your agility and what you're still capable to offer.
I'm with you.
So that you need a medical practitioner or usually an occupational therapist to do an assessment on yourself to see whether you have the ability and the hand function and the stability, because it's no use getting into a vehicle and then you are unsafe in there, you flop around and you can be injure yourself or someone else. So you first need to be assessed to determine whether you are able to drive.
Yeah, that's interesting. So the occupational therapist basically says to you, Raven, yes, you can do this, or Raven, no, you can't do this. And if they say you can't, it's one of those things where you don't want to be taking a chance from a road safety perspective.
Exactly. Or even say, Raven, you will be able to drive, but your hand function is not, or your grip, maybe you need a little bit more exercises, or let's try an adaptation. See?
So it takes a while to get to that point, right?
It does. But when it happens, we also, and I also just want to touch on something where you have a person that has been driving all of his or her life, and now at the age of 30 or even had a driver's license, and now being rendered quadriplegic or paraplegic, unable to drive now a normal vehicle. So that person has got all the ability and capabilities and know how to use the road and license also, but now cannot use the vehicle and because of the disability. That person also has to be reassessed. And just on that, and I'm not here to punt the organization, but QuadPara Association has got a program. It's called Driving Ambitions, that we take care of each and every step of the way of getting you mobile, active, and licensed to get behind the wheel again. I'm just putting that out there also as a way of informing the public of how easy it is to get back onto the road. But we have the know-how now and the experience because we had several successful candidates. But for a person who ends up in a hospital being quadriplegic or paraplegic now, it's always difficult because you wonder about all these things. How am I going to get around? How will I drive? Where will I live? Will I be able to go back into my house if I know I lived on a third floor story flat or those type of things? And those were the battles that I had, and it was the QuadPara Association that could assist me in getting the advice for overcoming those barriers.
No, I'm very excited to hear about the fact that you help people almost learn to drive again and to give them that skill, because I think being mobile is really super important. People need to find work, they need to go to work, but they've also got families that they want to look after. They want to take their kids to school, they want to go to hospital and all of this type of thing. So it's really important to be mobile. And as you said now, it's not cheap and it's not easy, but it is obviously something worth doing, which I think leads us to the next question. And this is public transport in South Africa geared to people with disabilities?
That depends on where you find yourself at. Because if you're in a rural area, and it will be very difficult for you to get around. Even if you're in one of our big cities, it will also be a little bit of challenging for you to get around. And I just want to emphasize on why I'm starting off my response with that, because in, we know that 11 years ago, all our big or most of our metros was geared up. We could accommodate the public that came to the World Cup in 2010. We know that there was vehicles around, and some of our public transport services was very integrated, and we could get around and accessible. And it hasn't changed much. But I mentioned earlier on about the dialer ride that we have in Cape Town. In Cape Town, there are these numerous gains and wins, shall I say, that as a person with a disability that we experience during the time that we have engaged with many of the municipalities. There are accessible public transport available, but it's few and far between. You have services that can work, and then you have some that is not working so well. So the biggest problem that we have currently is that it's not every form of public transport that is accommodating nor accessible.
And that's a problem, right? Because I mean, it's accessible and available to people who don't have disabilities. And you would expect that if you've got a disability, if you're in a wheelchair, you should be able to use any bus, any train, whatever you need to get around. And provision needs to be made for people with disabilities.
Yeah, but unfortunately, that is not the case. And it gives us also a chance of lobbying the Department of Transport to ensure that the needs of everyone is catered for. And I use the example of the biggest form of public transport that we currently have, informal as it is, the taxi association. I still want to see how someone can convince the driver or the owner of a taxi that you have to remove 4 seats to accommodate one wheelchair.
Yeah,
that would be difficult to do.
It doesn't happen.
Yes, it doesn't happen. Yes, we can see. We were even happier when we saw that there were bigger vehicles, larger vehicles on the road, because that maybe could indicate that there will be an indication or will be made a space available for us, because we do not want to leave the skills on the sidewalk. We want to be able to go to work and to function in society. That is what we want to do. As a person with a disability, we just want to be included.
Right. And I mean, I was going to ask you this question of the taxis because I know from experience, taxi drivers refuse to stop for people that have got that are in wheelchairs because it's a mission for them to load that person in the vehicle and then to also load the wheelchair. I mean, how do people do it currently? What do people in wheelchairs? How do they use taxis? How do they get around?
In very desperate cases or in desperate times, also desperate measures. And I know of many of my peers and friends and colleagues that use the taxis. However, you have to have a very good relationship with the driver, or you have to have a big pocket because you'll have to pay for the seat that your wheelchair takes. You even have to pay for the assistant to put it in. Sometimes we joke about it, we say it will cost you double the amount that it will cost a person that can stand on his own 2 feet to get into a taxi. Sure. Because you have to pay for the extra seat and you have to pay for the assistant to get you in the vehicle. And so that is not happening currently. We also see with some of our big cities, we do have accessible buses that comes around. And I'm using the example. The day that I tried it out, it was in 2010. It was on the 21st of March in 2010, before the World Cup, just to see if it works. I was waiting and checked the timetable. The accessible bus is there. When the bus arrived, the driver asked me if I can maybe assist or explain to him how to use the ramp that he has to deploy. So that driver was deployed with that bus, but he was not trained to use the accessible equipment. And that was a very significant day for me because you could see that some training goes into it also. So we do know that it's very difficult to get around if you use a wheelchair or any other mobility device.
So in terms of the mobility issue for people with disabilities, Raven, I mean, what is it that needs to be done? How do we make mobility more accessible for people with disabilities?
Leighton, that answer for me, it's easy because in the planning phases, in every step of the way of rolling out any plan to include people with disabilities, you have to consult. Consult the organizations because there's many people that is very knowledgeable. It's architects that are persons with disabilities. We have this. So the first thing would be to consult and include and also to take into consideration the recommendations that is being made by persons with disabilities. And I remember in 2007, we were part of a delegation that was in talks with the BRT, with planning of the bus rapid transit and the rollout of accessible transport. We are happy to be involved in it, even in the planning stages of the Gautrain and all of those. We're happy to be part of it because then we know that it will be accessible. But it's not always the case. And I want to make the example of here in the eThekwini municipality. There's still some talks of getting it accessible, but the talks has been going on for years and years, and the rollout thereof, it's not as quick or as efficient as we can see. So the short answer to that is to consult people with disabilities in the plans of getting any transport system accessible.
And I don't think we're talking about buildings here and wheelchair accessible buildings, because I think that is a completely different issue for me. It's getting to the building in the first place, right? And that remains a problem. Yeah.
Just on that, we have the saying that say accessibility starts at your front gate.
Right.
Because it's your responsibility of ensuring wherever you stay that the environment, the home environment, whether you live in a shack in Kailicha or whether you live in a double-story building in Camps Bay. I'm just using that as an example.
Right.
At your front gate, that is where it starts, because then the pavements have to be accessible so you can go to the bus stop if you have to, or to the train station, and from there it pans out. But it's very difficult for us to have a fully accessible environment out there, because we know first of all it costs money, and then also it takes time, and we know that it's been coming on for years, and we are still striving towards it. And I have to also acknowledge and commend the gains that we have, and also the experiences that we can have in some instances where we have very good examples of accessibility.
Sure. I think to a large extent, when we, for instance, look at our road fatality numbers in South Africa, and we look at the number of pedestrians that have been killed in road crashes, there's always this element of it's the human factor that is responsible for that. Now, the AA takes a little bit of exception to that, because the message that we put across is that if we know what the issues are that lead to the human factor becoming involved, then we should deal with it. And I'll give you an example. If, for instance, there are pedestrians that are killed crossing busy roads, then we need to ask, but is there a bridge for these people to cross over? And is there a proper sidewalk for these people to walk on? And I think that speaks to the issue that you've had as well, Raven, where it starts at the front door of the person with disabilities. Those sidewalks are not only there for pedestrians, they're there for people in wheelchairs as well. Those bridges are not only there for pedestrians and people on bicycles, they're there for people with wheelchairs as well. So I think that in our planning and in the transport planning, that is something that needs to factor more into that transport planning. And I think that's the message that I'm getting from you as well.
Yes, that is exactly as you mentioned it is. That in all aspects or all phases of the plan, just consult.
Now, Raven, just to wrap up, and I'm very glad we've had this discussion. We spoke about mobility and about vehicles that are specifically designed for people with disabilities, which is great, and it makes people mobile. We have this perennial problem in South Africa where people who are in vehicles that are equipped for them need to obviously be accommodated at shopping malls and at office parks with disability parking. And we see very often in most of these shopping centers and malls and business parks and stadiums that we go to, there is definitely disabled parking that is made available for people in wheelchairs. but not everybody respects that. And that's a problem for you guys.
It is a very big problem for us. It's a very big problem for us because also it can get technical also at times. We know that we all need our space. And for us, space is the biggest factor when it comes into not only the location of this parking base. And as a wheelchair user myself, and as the chief operations officer of the quadriplegic and paraplegic organization, we see the signs that demarcate these parking bays. We feel that we don't only own that space, we don't share it with everybody, but it's a wheelchair sign that depicts that the accessibility of that. And sometimes we also do get into a long debate with other persons with disabilities because we feel firstly that it's a wheelchair accessible parking bay. We need the size thereof. It's 3.5 meters wide, so you can open your door wide enough so you can get your wheelchair out, whether you access your vehicle from the side or from the back. But that is what it's for. And the number of parking bays also that's available is also a factor. But we are of the opinion that wheelchair users should be given first preference for the use of those parking bays. I just want to put that out there also because of the need thereof. And we know that there's many municipalities that have decent bylaws. It changes also now and then that the polices these parking bays. And a universal solution would be the solution for us, where you can have a parking desk where you qualify to use that parking bay. You can use that desk anywhere in South Africa. But at the moment, not all municipalities have the same bylaws, and that is also an issue, a problem for us. We can engage with the shopping center where someone has been denied a parking bay there because he feels a little bit disgruntled because when he got there, the parking bay was full, and the person that came out, when he saw the person using it, that according to him or her does not qualify to use that parking bay.
Right.
You know, the abuse thereof also. So there's many factors that relates to the correct use of these parking bays.
And Raven, what is your advice to somebody who comes across the situation where there is a parking bay, it is wheelchair friendly, but somebody who clearly does not have a wheelchair disability has now taken over that? And I mean, I think many people in South Africa have had that experience where they see somebody, quickly, they park there and they quickly run into the shopping center to do whatever. And they're clearly not disabled. And, how do you deal with that situation? Because I don't think people want to get into a confrontational position. They want to deal with it, but they want the right outcome. What is, in your view, what advice can you give people in that situation?
My advice would be not to engage. Avoid the confrontation.
Right.
Avoid the confrontation. But also report it, whether it is at a shopping mall or it is in a public road. It should be reported because we call that abuse of parking bays.
Right.
Because it's been not being used correctly. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, we as people with disabilities, we might claim the use thereof for us first and foremost, but we do not have jurisdiction over those parking bays.
Right.
And what we do as an organization or as a sector level, we engage with the lawmakers, we engage with the Department of Transport. We want that universal solution for the problem that we have. And there's talks and there is a high level discussion that is with the municipalities at the strategic level now, where very soon a discussion paper is out there because we want that national parking desk scheme. So my advice would be to someone to not to engage that person that you see that is abusing the parking bay, but to report it also to the authorities or to the organizations with of persons with disabilities.
Okay.
And just a unique way, and I use it as an example. We have a WhatsApp line that we ask people to, if you see that, take a picture.
Yeah.
Of the vehicle. Not we know with the POPI Act to get not getting into a discussion or debate with the use of the registration number, but get a picture so we can know the location. What we do, and I spend a portion of my day engaging with the owners of the shopping centers or the municipalities which you can see there to find out if they have their policies in place, what are their policies of policing those parking bays, so
Right.
we can have the correct need for it. If it is education that they need, or or awareness, we can build that into a program that we have. But my advice would be not to engage with the person that is abusing that parking bay. We rather engage with the whistleblower, because we see that as good people. We
Okay.
see that is a person that wants to bring about that change. So yes, you can fight it. We have various campaigns that we have it, but you can fight it at a different level. Do not have that confrontation with a person who is parked illegally, or abusing the accessible parking bay.
Excellent. That's really good advice. And Raven, I thank you for that. And thank you very much for joining us today. I think one of the things that people without disabilities often forget is that we share the road with everybody. As somebody who is not disabled and who does have a vehicle, I have the privilege of getting into a car, starting that car and driving where I need to go, parking wherever I want to, getting out and walking into wherever I need to go to. But we need to appreciate that we share the road with other people. We share the road with people who use motorbikes. We share the road with public transport operators. We share the road with people who are on bicycles. We share the road with pedestrians, and we share the road with people with disabilities who are also driving their vehicles on that road with us. And we park at the same places that they do, and we need to use the same facilities that they do. And I think that one of the things that I want to highlight through this specific podcast is that there needs to be a mutual respect. We need to respect people with disabilities, and obviously people with disabilities need to respect everybody else. And I think that by and large does happen. But Raven, thank you very much for your time. I wish you and the QuadPara Association all of the best going forward. And I sincerely believe that discussing this issue makes it more relevant for people who don't have disabilities to understand what you guys with disabilities are going through on a daily basis. So thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the fact that we could engage. Thank you for sharing the opportunity and the platform there. And also thank you to everyone that is sharing the road with us. As you mentioned there, at times, that is the only place where we feel that we belong. Because when I sit behind the wheel of my car, no one sees my disability. No one sees my wheelchair because it's in the boot. And I also have that opportunity of being included in society. It is only when I stop at the parking bay, when I have to get out, that the disability comes into play again. So we appreciate the fact that we can share the roads with the South African public, with everyone there, and we are aware of the fact that this is a two-way street, because respect goes a long way. We have respect for the public, and the public must have respect for people with disabilities and their needs.
Amen. And thanks for that, Raven. And with that, I bring a close to this episode of AA Connect, the podcast of the Automobile Association. Thank you for joining us.